Story 1. The night was thick, a starless sky draped like a black curtain over the world. Luana, a 23-year-old with a fascination for supernatural tales, gripped her camera tightly, her heart pounding with excitement and a faint chill down her spine. She had always dreamed of capturing something beyond the ordinary, something that proved the veil between the living and the unknown was thinner than people thought. The old St. Gabriel Cemetery on the outskirts of her town seemed the perfect place. Surrounded by twisted trees and steeped in local legends, it was notorious for tales of shadows and murmurs no one could explain. Luana slipped through the rusted gate just after midnight. The air was heavy, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and moss. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating weathered tombstones, some so ancient their names were nearly erased. She adjusted her camera, snapping photos of crooked crosses and stone angels with hollow eyes, feeling a mix of adrenaline and unease. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the crunch of her footsteps on dry grass. Then she heard it. A low sound, barely audible at first, like a breeze carrying words. Luana. The voice was guttural, raspy, as if it came from a throat unused for centuries. She froze, her fingers tightening around the camera. The sound came again, clearer, closer. Luana. It seemed to come from all directions, yet also from below, as if the earth itself were whispering her name. Her heart raced, and she swung her flashlight, searching for the source. Nothing. Just tombstones and darkness. Trying to stay calm, she muttered to herself that it was just her imagination. After all, she was alone, and the cemetery was old, full of stories her mind might be turning into reality. But then, the temperature dropped sharply. The air, once humid and warm, turned icy, as if she'd stepped into a freezer. A thick fog began to rise from the ground like smoke, curling around the tombstones and swallowing her flashlight's beam. The light, once strong, now barely pierced the mist, casting shapeless shadows that seemed to dance. Luana. The whisper returned, now multiple, as if several voices overlapped, some deep, some shrill, all laced with an eerie urgency. She took a step back, tripping over an exposed root. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into total darkness. Panic surged. She shook the flashlight, trying to revive it, but it stayed dead. The only sounds were her ragged breathing and those relentless whispers, now so close they seemed to echo inside her skull. Suddenly, she felt something, a light, freezing touch, like skeletal fingers brushing the back of her neck. The sensation was so vivid she screamed, spinning and swiping at the air, but nothing was there. Just the fog, now so thick she could barely see her own hands. The whispers morphed into a chorus, a constant murmur that seemed to mock her, laughing at her foolish bravery. "Stay, Luana, stay." The voices were insistent, almost hypnotic, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a strange urge to obey, to sit among the tombstones and let the fog consume her. But her survival instinct kicked in. Luana dropped the useless flashlight and ran, guided only by her memory of the path to the gate. Her feet stumbled over roots and stones, and with every step, she felt those icy fingers again, grazing her neck, her shoulders, as if something were chasing her, toying with her. The gate finally loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the fog. With a final burst of strength, she burst through it, collapsing onto the dirt road outside. When she looked back, the fog seemed to be dissipating, but the whispers lingered in her mind, as if they'd followed her. Luana never returned to St. Gabriel's Cemetery. The camera she dropped in her escape was found days later by a groundskeeper, containing photos she didn't remember taking, blurry images of eyeless faces staring directly into the lens. To this day, she wakes in the middle of the night, sometimes hearing a distant whisper calling her name. The ancient cemetery of Villa Sombria stretched out under a moonless sky, its crumbling tombstones swallowed by the night's oppressive darkness. Marcos, a 28-year-old rookie groundskeeper, was finishing his shift later than usual. The air was thick with the scent of decayed leaves and old stone, and a faint chill clung to his skin despite the humid evening. He'd heard the local tales, whispers of restless spirits and strange sightings, but he brushed them off as superstition. His job was simple: tend the graves, lock the mausoleums, and leave. Yet, as the hours crept past dusk, an uneasy weight settled in his chest. Marcos was tasked with securing the old Carvalho family mausoleum, a towering structure of weathered granite, its iron door creaking with age. The cemetery was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. He carried a heavy flashlight, its beam slicing through the shadows as he approached the mausoleum's entrance. The door groaned as he pushed it open to check inside, a habit he'd picked up to ensure no animals, or worse, vandals, had slipped in. The interior was cold, the air stale, and the faint echo of his footsteps bounced off the stone walls. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Reflected on the mausoleum's inner wall, illuminated by his flashlight, was a shadow, a tall, distorted figure that didn't match his own. It was unnaturally elongated, its edges jagged, as if it belonged to something not quite human. Marcos froze, his breath catching in his throat. He swung the flashlight around, expecting to see someone behind him, but the cemetery was empty, just rows of graves fading into the dark. He turned back, and the shadow was still there, now sharper, its form more defined, yet it had no face, just a void where features should have been. His heart pounded as he backed toward the door, the shadow seeming to shift with him, stretching across the stone like a living thing. Then came the sound, a high-pitched hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire, but laced with an eerie, almost vocal quality. It wasn't coming from the mausoleum, but from somewhere behind him, out in the open. Marcos spun, his flashlight trembling in his grip, but the beam revealed nothing. The hiss grew louder, more insistent, as if it were circling him, closing in. Panic clawed at his chest. He stumbled to the iron door, fumbling with the heavy lock. The shadow on the wall moved again, now gliding toward him, its form towering over his own reflection. The hissing became a chorus, sharp and grating, filling his ears until it felt like it was burrowing into his skull. He slammed the door shut, the clang of metal echoing through the cemetery, and jammed the key into the lock, twisting it with shaking hands. The moment the lock clicked, the afternoon was fading into a gray dusk as Clara, a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s, stepped into the quiet expanse of the Santa Lucia Cemetery. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and a thin mist clung to the ground, curling around the weathered tombstones. She came to visit her late aunt's grave, a ritual she performed every few months to lay flowers and whisper a quiet prayer. The cemetery was familiar, almost comforting, but today, an unsettling stillness hung over the place, as if the world was holding its breath. Clara knelt by the grave, arranging a small bouquet of white lilies, her fingers brushing the cold stone. The silence was broken by a faint sound, a soft, plaintive sob, like that of a child. It came from the far corner of the cemetery, a neglected area where overgrown weeds tangled with crumbling headstones. Clara paused, her heart skipping a beat. The sound was so clear, so human, that she stood, glancing around. No one else was in sight, just rows of graves stretching into the dim light. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate, tugging at her heart. She hesitated, then stepped toward the sound, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The cemetery was eerily empty, and the mist seemed to thicken as she moved, swirling around her ankles. As she neared the desolate corner, the crying stopped abruptly, leaving only the faint drip of water from nearby trees. Clara stood still, her breath shallow, scanning the shadows for any sign of a child. Nothing, just silence and the faint outline of forgotten graves. Then a new sound pierced the quiet, a low, chilling giggle, sharp and cold, like ice cracking underfoot. It wasn't a child's laugh, not anymore. It carried a malice that made her skin crawl. Clara froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. The giggle came again, closer now, as if whatever made it was standing just out of sight. She clutched her coat, her eyes darting around, but the mist obscured everything beyond a few feet. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling. No answer, only the echo of that unnatural laugh. As she took a cautious step back, her gaze dropped to the ground. There, in the wet earth, small footprints began to appear, one after another, forming slowly as if an invisible child were walking toward her. The prints were tiny, no bigger than a toddler's, but uneven, dragging, as if the feet were malformed. They moved in a straight line, closing the distance between her and the unseen source. Clara's breath hitched, her body rooted to the spot as the footprints stopped just inches from her own shoes. The air grew colder, the mist tightening around her like a shroud. The giggle erupted again, now right beside her ear, so close she felt a faint breath against her cheek. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a low gravestone, and ran toward the cemetery's entrance.